it's Elle here, Hardcore Sales, not Hardcore Sales. And today I've got the absolute pleasure of introducing Bill Lee-Emery from the Gold Coast in Australia. Hi, Bill.
Hi, Elle. I'm so happy to be here. Couple of reasons. One, I used to live in England many years ago, and part of when I was traveling, I lived in Spain in a little town called Tossa de Mar, which is 90 km north of Barcelona. And I can still say, dos de betos, por favor, but that's pretty much the end of my Spanish.
It's not far off mine, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
You try, but I mean, we were doing quite well, but then of course 18 months of lockdown meant that we didn't get the practice in real life that we were hoping for, which doesn't always work out. So thank you ever so much for being here and sharing with us your incredible knowledge about how to become nearly bulletproof from criticism. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Bill.
Okay, so the book started, actually the origin of the book was in my early 30s, and I was teaching accelerated learning to a group of special education teachers. And most of these people, there's 20 of them, most of them had at least a master's in education and some of them PhDs. And I don't have a degree in education, but I was teaching about stuff that they didn't know that I knew. The program went for 8 weeks and 3 hours a week. And in the second week, I was talking about a model called transactional analysis that your listeners can just, search for and you'll get some idea of what it is. But basically it talks about there's a parental part of us, an adult part of us, and a child part of us. And I made the statement that I didn't think that guilt was a good way of getting kids to do things. And I still don't. Well, that just triggered this woman, and she launched into the most vitriolic personal and professional attack I've ever experienced in my life. No one has come anywhere near close to the vitriol and the Scud missile she was sending me. But fortunately, I had learnt a few things by that time in my early 30s of how to defend myself, how to take care of myself without attacking her. So that's what's really the start of this. And but what started the book was every year for the last 8 or 9 years, I go to men's gatherings here in Australia, and I usually present on a variety of different things. And one day I was sitting at lunch listening to men talk, and I noticed a lot of them were saying that they found it hard to take criticism, either in the work situation or from their partner or from some of their friends, and they would literally take it to heart. And the problem with that is if we become so precious, if you like, and we take things too deeply into our heart, it means it's very hard for people to give us critique, which can be very useful, especially in a professional setting, that can help us to grow. So the next meeting that came up, I ran a program that was very successful. I had lots of fun, they had lots of fun, and people giving me really good feedback. I'm going, okay, maybe it's time to write another book. I've written 4 books already. Maybe this is the next book. And so I put all those things together. And what I really want to do is to make it of service to people so they can do 2 things. One is deal with external criticism. So if someone's calling you all kinds of names, how do you deal with that? And if you think of how divisive the world has been in the last 2 years in particular, no matter what side of the argument you'd like to be on, people become very strident, they become very set in their ways, and everybody else is the enemy. And so to speak whatever it is that your truth is, your point of view is really hard because of all the criticism that can come your way. But the other one, of course, is the internal criticism. And sometimes, when I've been talking with my coaching clients, their biggest bane is their internal critic that just rides them into the ground. You didn't do that properly, you're not good enough, and you have the perfectionist streak. And so how do you deal with all of that and in a way that's humane and useful to us? So the whole idea of the book was, how can I make the stuff that I've learned, my experiences, useful to other people? Because that's really been my focus for the last 40-something years. Does that make sense?
Sounds wonderful. It does. It makes perfect sense to me. Absolutely. I think it's really interesting to identify those 2 zones of criticism that actually it can come from clients, customers, staff, family, you know, anything, anyone that's not you, but then also how powerful that internal criticism of ourselves can be, and how much that can actually hold us back or prevent us moving into a zone of genius that maybe we're worried about. I mean, in the book that you mentioned, you mentioned a story about singing.
Yes. So I won't tell the ending of the story, because otherwise, why would you read the book? You want to read the book. So, but when I was young, this is in England when I was in primary school, my favourite teacher, her name was Miss Surtees, and this is at Eastern County Primary School in Middlesex. So she's my favourite teacher. You know, we all admired her, we all liked her. She had those kind of steely blue eyes that she didn't mess with, but she had a big, warm heart. And so we're having singing lessons, and you know, all the kids were lined up, and she's listened to all the kids as we sang our hearts out. And so there's an opportunity to be in the choir, and I wanted to be in the choir because I thought it was kind of a cool thing. So I'm singing my heart out, and she's listened to all the kids, and she came up to me and she whispered something in my ear. And when we're a child, we're like almost a blank piece of paper. Whatever gets written on that blank piece of paper can literally change the direction of our life. And so what she said stayed with me for decades. Now, I won't finish that story because then you'll just have to read the book. The other story from the same primary school was my maths and English teacher, Mr. Sargent, lovely man. And again, he was, one day he was reading out all our little essays, and we had to write a descriptive essay, and there was, had an oak tree, it's an English forest, and there was an oak tree and squirrels and stuff. So he stopped the class and said, listen, I've got to read this one out. It's particularly good. And there's one, you know, there's always one kid in the class that's a smarty that, you know, gets A's all the way through, and I'm going, yeah, it's going to be him. So I kind of glazed over, and then he read out the essay. And again, that experience shaped, and what he said shaped the rest of my life. So when we're young, we don't have the consciousness, the capacity to think through things, the way to measure things up, so we can make useful sense of them. They just become literally part of who we are as a human being. And the problem with that is, if we don't challenge some of those early messages that we got, we can be constricted in our lives and not do the things that would really bring, you know, like joy to our hearts because someone said something years ago. And then, of course, we internalize it. That little voice goes around, around, around. You can't do this. You're not good at it. Blah, 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 blah. On it goes, on it goes, on it goes. So we need to challenge it. We need to, if you like, become a sovereign human being. You know, we are all influenced by our parents, by our culture, by the era that we grew up in. But sooner or later, we need to work out what is the good stuff from our parenting, what is the stuff that just doesn't serve us anymore, and have the wisdom to make that discernment, keep the good stuff, and drop the stuff that just doesn't serve us and holds us back in life.
I think that's a really interesting point. I even in my own family, I can remember my dad telling my mum that she always sings flat. But she'd been in choirs for years by that point, but it just destroyed her confidence for singing. And but how do you go about? Maybe it's too big a question for a few minutes chat. Maybe it's a whole coaching, 8 weeks. Yeah. But how do you help somebody begin to let go of something like that? That she's had, say 40 years ingrained within her that actually she always sings flat.
Yeah. You're right, that is a big question. But let me just take one part of it, and I'll talk about this in the book. And I've had several mentors in my life that have just really helped me to grow as a human being. And I highly recommend, if you can find a mentor, no matter what your industry or whatever it might be, find people that have been ahead of you. So there might be 3-4 steps ahead of you, and have the compassion and the understanding to help someone along the way. Because in a sense, we're all headed in the same direction, just at different speeds. So one of my mentors, his name is John, and he was teaching us about this model called transaction analysis, that by now I hope your listeners are curious enough to go, okay, let's just go search what it means, and then you'll get some real beautiful things coming your way. Anyway, one of the training days, on the whiteboard, he wrote this sentence, and he said that life is meaningless. Now, that kind of shocked us because we were in this journey for a year with him, and it was about exploring who we are as human beings, the meaning of life, and John saying life is meaningless. What the heck? And then he went on to explain. He said that, and this, by the way, this particular concept has served me so well ever since I first heard that. It's like one of my default patterns I get into when something is upsetting for me. This is one of the absolute default pieces of software that just kicks in because it's so valuable. So if you're got pen and paper, your listeners got pen and paper, write this down. This is just like so valuable. And you can thank Elle afterwards for getting me on the show. So what happens? He said he wrote the word event in the middle of the flip chart, and he said that every event in life is meaningless. It's innocent. It's purely an event. Breakfast is an event. Lunch is an event. Christmas is an event. Our life is full of events. And what he was saying, and this has been said by philosophers for millennia, is that life is what it is that we make it. And so everything that happens to us is innocent. It has no meaning at all. However, human beings are compulsive meaning-making machines. You're walking down the street, you see someone that you say hello, they completely ignore you. In nanoseconds, your brain has gone, what's wrong with them? Did they notice me? What's wrong with me? Blah, blah, blah. And the head just goes on and on and on and on and on, making up all kinds of meanings. And it might be this person just had some really bad news and they're just doing a lot of internal, it's got nothing to do with you. But of course, we make up meanings. And John said, whatever meaning we make up, and given that there are a multitude of choices, whatever meaning we make up from that event will create our reality. For example, let's say I wake up in the morning and it's raining, and I'm going, oh no, it's raining. I want to go to the beach, and I live in Queensland. The beach is 10 minutes drive away. I want to go to the beach now. It's spoiled my day. And I use that phrase, it has spoiled my day. For the rest of the day, I'm going to have a shitty day because I've decided that's the way the day is going to be. Or I can go, wow, it's raining, great. I can read my book, get cups of tea, read my book, don't have to go outside. Yay, what a beautiful day. Same day, it's just rain. But the meaning I make about that is shapes my day. And the other thing that John said that made so much sense, he says, one, it's always self-chosen, we always choose it. And he said, it doesn't matter whether the meaning that you're making is true or not, because that's an open conversation. But he said the real key is it useful? Is the meaning that we're making of this event useful or not? And if it's useful, keep it. But if it's not, then drop it. So coming back to your mum, someone says something. She makes a meaning about herself. She takes it literally to heart. If you listen to our language, people take it to their heart. They don't take it to their elbow or their knee. They take it to the heart where it could do the most damage. And then from their heart, they take it down to their belly and they make it part of their identity of who they are as a human being. But they're not. They're just something that they did. So, the opportunity for your mum or anybody else listening to this and someone says something, one is go, well, they've just said something. What's going to be useful to me? So if someone is giving me critique, then I can ask myself, well, what are they saying is actually useful to me? What can I take on board that I can make useful sense to myself and my life and moving forward? And if there's nothing, then I can drop it. So there's one other thing. Actually, it's a whole bunch of things. Let me just, one other thing is I think correct. The other thing that John said, he held up a pen. And so if your listeners can just pick up a pen or something like that. And he said, okay, if someone says, this is a really rubbish pen that I've made it from my own hands, and someone says, that's a really rubbish pen, does that make me a rubbish person? And obviously the answer is no, because they're talking about the pen. Conversely, if you make something, you make a pen, you make a drawing, whatever it might be, and someone goes, wow, that's beautiful, does that make you a beautiful person? Well, no, it doesn't, because they're still talking about the pen or the thing, whatever it is that you have made. So he said, when people take things to heart, they haven't separated who they are as a human being and what they have done. So we need to separate the pen, if you like, and ourselves, because they're separate things. We are connected, but they are separate. So what happens literally, and Elle, you can see me, the listeners can't see me, but I'm actually taking the pen and I'm putting it close to my heart. So if someone says, Bill, that's a shitty pen, in my own head, I can make it mean, oh, you're calling me a shitty person. Well, no, but it's so close. It's right close to my heart. So that's literally what happens when people take things to their heart and they become so sensitive. And the downside of that is they're unable to take useful critique that can help them to grow and expand. So one of my defaults is that everything in life is useful. It doesn't matter what happens to me. I can either make good use of it, I can spiral up, or I can spiral down. But the choice is always going to be mine. It's always going to be mine. Happiness is always an inside job. And I know this is really hard sometimes for people to hear, especially now with all the things that are going on the planet. And I won't go there with all the things that are going on the planet. But ultimately, our sense of worth, our sense of happiness, our sense of joy, either comes down to us, regardless of the circumstance, or we become a puppet of the world and of all the things that are going on in the world. And for me, that's a choice. I'm choosing to make my happiness in my hands. I'm not going to give it to anybody else or the world, because if I do, then I'm gone. I'm a sheep, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you lose yourself, don't you? I mean, it's really easy to do. I think that's why people, get poorly in some ways, isn't it? Within a well-being, poorly, because you just lose your insides. So it just sort of dissipates.
Yeah.
So thinking about criticism, and we've talked a lot about receiving criticism, but a lot of my listeners might be team leaders, managers, business owners. How do you think they could deliver criticism? Because running a business, people are going to do stuff wrong. That's just nature of people. We don't get everything right every time, even when we've been shown it several times, we still get it wrong. So how, as a business owner, manager, whatever, someone that's got people that they're leading, how is a good way of helping them receive constructive criticism and viewing it thusly?
Yeah, so actually that's a really important question. It's a very empowering concept. Once you understand it, it's really easy. So let me just backtrack a bit. There's a man called Edward Deming who created something called total quality management. And if any of your listeners are driving Japanese cars, it's probably because of this man at the end of World War II. He basically helped Japan reorchestrate their entire industry, including the automobile industry. He was an American. You're probably not driving an American car because they lost it because they didn't understand what he was talking about.
Yeah,
and what he said was, when things go wrong, he said, be hard on the system and soft on the people. In other words, let's say someone's in an organization and there is a procedure for doing whatever it might be, filing as an example, and someone does the filing wrong. Well, the chances are they didn't wake up in the morning and go, hey, you know what? I think I'm just going to mess up the filing system because, hey, that's the kind of person I am. They did what they did best, what they thought they were supposed to do, but the system itself didn't train them adequately enough or get feedback along the way so the person could actually be a master of the filing system and nail it every single time. Now, if the person is just criticized, put down, bawled out and made a mockery of, then they don't learn. And the system keeps on failing the organization. So if anything is going wrong, then look at the system itself. The other thing that I learned from Deming and other people is this, and this is when my daughter was growing up, she would bring me a painting, as 5-year-olds do, and she would say, Daddy, what do you think of this? Now, I know she's asking for two things, one conscious and the other is unconscious. The first thing is that she's asking me, she's looking for validation of her painting. That's the outside stuff. Daddy, what do you think of this painting? But I know deeper underneath that, what she's saying is, tell me how good I'm doing at life in my 5-year-old painting. So I'd ask her these 2 questions, and your listeners, I highly recommend write these 2 questions down. You can use them in a corporate sense. You can use it in a personal sense. It's ubiquitous. You can use it everywhere. You can use it for yourself. So the first question is this, that I asked her. I said to her, so darling, what do you like about your painting? And she said, I like the greens and the blues and the reds and the shapes. I said, okay, good. Anything else? And she told me what she liked. So then I asked her, so if you were to do it again, what would you change or do differently or add? So she thought for a minute and said, well, I'd have more, purple here or more orange here, or I'd do this or the other. And so that's the first question was, what do you like about what you've just done? The second question is, what would you do differently next time? So I asked her first because I wanted her to get a sense of what she liked. Then I said to her, and would you like my thoughts and my opinions? Now, I've got to say, sometimes she'd say yes and sometimes she'd say no. And I'm happy with either answer. In fact, I was quite chuffed when she says, no doubt, I don't want your opinion. I'm going, yeah, good, because you're internalizing this. So then I'd say, okay, I like this about the painting. I'm giving my honest and sincere feedback. And again, it's my opinion. It's not a fact. It's my opinion. And then I'd tell her, well, maybe next time we do it like this or this or this. So what she's doing is, first of all, recognizing what's working. And secondly, what she could do differently. And notice there is no criticism. There's no put downs. There's no nasty tone of voice that says you're doing this wrong. So when I first learned this, especially when I'm learning something new, I would ask myself, after I've done something, I'd say, okay, Bill, so what do you like about what you've done? Now, the temptation for people when they've done a piece of work is they go, yeah, that's not very good. And they pick it apart. There's 99 things that are working, and they'll pick the one thing that isn't working, and they make it bigger than they need to, and they wonder why they lack self-confidence. It's because they're basically bitching away at their own confidence. So this is the opposite. You find what works and you go, good, and you acknowledge that and you take it, literally take that to heart, take that into your identity, and that's useful. But then also there's the capacity to go, okay, so what else could I do? Well, I could do this next time, and I could do that next time. So it's continual improvement. So if you're a manager, you're working with a team, or even for yourself, and you do something, especially if you're doing something new, instead of giving yourself a bad time about the things that you didn't do really well, ask yourself, what do I like about what I've just done? And sometimes in the beginning, I had to not force myself, but be firm with myself to let that happen. Otherwise, it's so easy to get into the critical part of our parent going, no, that's not very good, that's not perfect. Oh, by the way, if any perfectionists listening to this, the book it's priceless. It is priceless. If you're a perfectionist, read this book. Send it to all your perfectionist friends. They will thank you for it. So this is what you can do. It's very simple. You just give a structure and you ask, your team, the person in the team, so what do you like about what you did? So then you get an idea of what they've taken on board, what part of the system they've understood. Then you can also get an idea from the second question is, what are the bits that they haven't yet understood? So the system, the training system itself needs to support that. So they embed that behavior so they know exactly what to do, then they can go on. And so you've taught them one thing, but the bigger thing is you'll give them a system where they can start to do this for themselves. That's a way bigger benefit, way bigger benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. But my follow-up question would be that within a work environment, sometimes we have to do tasks that we don't enjoy very much, especially within a sales environment. That there are lots of natural salespeople who don't think anything of doing some parts of the job, but then there are other people that are really good at it, but they might have to work, I don't know if hard is the right word, but differently, within themselves to. I'm thinking maybe some people are slightly more introverted, but they've got to do cold calling, just take
Yes.
an extreme example. So if I said to them, what part of that did you like? The answer is going to be none of it.
Yeah. So then that's when you really have to, like I teach public speaking, was one of the things I taught for many, many years. And someone would get up and they'd do something, and I'd say to them, so what do you like? And they go, I didn't like any of it. The rubbish. I go, well, okay, I want to go back here, and I'm not going to let you go until you give me 3 things that you like. I don't mind if we're here for 3 days. I'm not going to leave, and you're going to leave until you give me 3 things. And it might be, well, I open my mouth. Good, great, yay. Public speaking is about opening your mouth. And what happened next? Well, I said something good. So there's 2 things. Maybe the 3rd thing is I just spit at the audience or whatever it might be. So I am relentless. Like when I'm coaching, that's kind of, I'll make sure they get, because I want them to get into the habit of finding what is working. Actually, can I tell you another story relevant to this? I had the pleasure and the honour of training with the Australian national skydiving team. Now, these guys jump out of aeroplanes at 16,000 feet, whatever that is in meters. And so myself and a business partner were with them for 10 days, and we did 14 jumps and 10,000 feet at 16,000 feet. We did 5 jumps in one day, 3 before lunch. My adrenal glands were just shattered for a week after all that. But one of the things that I noticed is that, so the guy, they'd go up and they'd do formation work, and they'd have a videographer, and they would video what the team was doing, and they'd come back and they'd debrief it. And I noticed at the beginning of the day, they'd start with a score around 10 or 12, which is not bad. But then as the day got on, and they do like 5 jumps classically in a day, by the time they got to jump 5, it was down to an 8 or a 7. So they were getting worse over the day. So the coach said to me, he said, Bill, I don't know what's going on here. So can you help? So the situation, I just sat in one of their sessions, and I noticed that as soon as he started debriefing, he would notice all the things that they were doing wrong. And he would mention that something else and something else and something else. And then they go up another jump. So when they go up in the jump, what they're thinking about is what they've done wrong. So when you think about what you've done wrong, you'll do more of it, because the general principle is whatever you think about, you're going to get more of it. So that's why their scores were getting less and less and less. And they had a world championship coming up the next year. So they kind of nailed this. So I explained to him, about focusing on what works and what you could do differently. And he, yeah, good. So the next day we went up. We do the jumps, and he comes back, and old habits sometimes die hard. And he's going and saying, you didn't do this, and you didn't do that, and that wasn't good enough. And I'm looking, going, come on, dude, we just talked about this. So there was a whiteboard, and the team could see the whiteboard, but he couldn't. So I put a line down the middle, I put a plus sign in one column and a negative sign in the other. And every time he said something negative, I put a mark on the negative column. When he said something positive, I put, and I hadn't told the team what I was doing, but they could see every time he said something negative, there was another stroke. Every time he said something positive, there was another stroke. And it was like 5 to 1 at least on the negative side. And they started giggling. They started laughing. They're going, because they could see what was going on. And now they're distracted and they're kind of smirking to themselves. So he told me, and he looked at the board and he goes, oh, man. And he apologized to the team and he said, okay, let's do this whole thing again and let's find out what works. And the scores went up and up and up and up. So whatever we focus on in our life, we'll get more of. If we focus on all the things that are depressing in our life, that's a great way to stay depressed. And if I wanted to depress myself, that's all I do. For half an hour, think of all the horrible things in the world of my life and and half an hour I'll be well and truly depressed. But hey, I don't like doing that so much. I'd much rather, my partner and I, we do a practice on gratitude pretty much every day. We think about, what are the 3 things that we are grateful for? And as I mentioned before, we live in an eco-village in a beautiful valley. There are no dogs or cats. We have kangaroos all over the place, and koalas, and beautiful birds. And it's so easy for us to go, wow, I just so love living here. The community is so warm and nurturing. So we make it a point to focus on those things that we really like. So if you want to feel joyful, find those things, even small things. Small things, it's just beautiful. It's like those small things that can bring some joy into your life, because it's either full of joy or full of shit. Take a choice. Whichever you focus on, that's what you're going to get.
Absolutely. I regularly say in the group, Systems and Wellbeing for Property Experts, my free Facebook group, I regularly say in there, where focus goes, energy flows, which I think is a Tony Robbins phrase. But
yeah. Tony Robbins would have said
Tony,
that.
yeah. It's just lovely. And it's so succinct, and it just explains exactly what you said. And it's a nice little mantra to remind yourself, sort of almost a mental slap, to sort of
yes.
to sort of jolt yourself out of the the negative spiral that sometimes you can get into. It's not difficult to do. And I think also one of the things that happens from my medical and psychology days is that you can sort of almost train your brain into these negative pathways, so that becomes much easier. So one of the things I purport as well is journaling every morning, and part of the journaling prompts that are over on my website are 3 gratitudes every morning, because it can just really remind you that it's not all doom and gloom, and you're also then practicing reprogramming those neural pathways.
So it makes it easier to go down that way.
Exactly. So the more you practice, the better you're going to get at something, and because that's where your focus goes, that's where your energy flows, right?
Yeah. and ultimately, the life that we live, we either give control to other people, or we take charge and we take responsibility for how we're living our life. So it's so easy to blame everybody else. I mean, that's a lot of fun. It's their fault, his fault, your fault, whatever. Government, blah, 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 blah. You can go on forever and it'll never end. Or you can just go, well, what's the bits that I can do for myself? What are the bits that I can be responsible for? And one of the things that John said to us, coming back to my mentor, in my early days, when I first kind of woke up and realised that there was other things in life besides what I was focusing on. And he said there are 3 areas of responsibility. He said the first one is for being responsible for what you think. And if we're not responsible for what we think, then we can go, it's kind of like a head brain can go anywhere in the universe. And often, the meanings that we make aren't useful. He said the second thing is being responsible for our own emotional reactions in the world. And this is easy to understand, but can be tough to do. It's so easy to blame other people. You make me angry, you make me sad, blah, 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 blah. But ultimately, our happiness is always on the inside. And the third thing he said is that to be responsible for what you do. So when we take charge of all those 3 things, life changes. But if we don't take responsibility for any one of those, then life is kind of spiral down. And we've got choice. All this stuff is learnable. Heck, I wasn't born having all this knowledge. I learned it from other people. So it is all learnable, every single bit.
Yeah, I think that's the important part. For many people, you don't have to go it alone. You're not, whatever path you're on, whether that's learning NLP or whether that's learning estate agency or moving from lettings into sales, as well as growing your business and all those sorts of things. There are other people that have done it before you and with great success. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just say, hey, can I borrow your wheel?
Yeah, indeed.
That's what we're all here for.
Yeah, we can just model what other people have done. And I think it's Tony Robbins that said success leaves clues. So if you want to be successful, find the clues that other people are going to litter it all over the place and just do those same things. So, and what you're offering too is helping people to go, okay, I've got choices here. I can go down this path, or I can go down this path. I can learn from people. Like in your industry, there'll be some people that are likely would love to be mentors to other people coming through. There's a story about the old lion and the young lion. I haven't heard this one, but there's an old lion in the jungle, and he's surveying his kingdom, and he's got battle scars. He's been around for a long time and got lots of stories to tell. And he looks down and he can see a young lion, in the glade further down there. He looks at the young lion and goes, I remember what it used to be like, to be young and bulletproof and whatever, and just the energy, and I would love to be like that again. But actually, I would love to tell him some of my stories. And anyway, then you kind of zoom down to the young lion, and he happens to look up. He sees the old lion and goes, wow, that's a legend up there. That guy's a legend. He's been around. He's done this. He's done that. I'd love to talk to him, but why would he want to listen why would he want to talk to a young lion like me? I know nothing. And so the young lion and the old lion, they actually need to have a conversation because they'll actually be serving the other. So if anyone here listening, it could be a mentor to somebody else, and be a mentor. But if you're the young lion or the young lioness, then go find a mentor who can help guide you through some of the tough things that we all have to live through and be challenged by, so we can really bring out the best inside of us. That's why podcasts are so great, because you can listen to it in the car, when you're doing whatever it is that you're doing, you can listen. You can take some really good things on board and then go, okay, how do I apply it? Because the application is the gift. It's not in the theory, it's in the gift. You can listen to 1 million podcasts, but until you do something, nothing is going to shift. So it's putting things into practice, small bit, little bits, again.
And putting into practice, I know it's a homonym, but practice putting things into practice. Don't be so hard on yourself. You're not going to get it right the first time. That's okay. With some of my social media clients, when we're starting to grow their social media presence, they can find that quite intimidating, because putting yourself out there just raises the chances of negative things happening as much as it does positive things happening. But I think what you've said about remembering that you can just take what's useful from that is really, really key. So I think that's a really, really helpful way of thinking about it, that actually it's a learning curve, and you can say to, negative reviews, thank you, because actually what you're saying here is you're right. We've got a learning lesson, and that's really helpful of you. So appreciate your feedback almost.
Indeed. In fact, I was in a program learning myself about some things, and someone made a comment in a Facebook group and said, listen, Bill, I hope you don't take it personally. I'm going, well, no, I won't. And blah, 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 blah. I'm going, wow, far out. Thank you. And I actually changed complete direction, because what he was saying opened my eyes to something that was in front of me, but I wasn't seeing. But he could see it because he was outside of me. And if I hadn't have had that critique, if someone hadn't been compassionate enough, generous enough to give me that feedback, I would have gone on a certain trail, and it probably wouldn't be anywhere near as good as the track I'm taking now. So, everything is useful. And if someone has got the compassion and the capacity to go, hey, think of it like this instead, or maybe explore that, that's such a gift. So when someone is criticizing you, go, yeah, come on, bring it closer. I want to really know what it is that you're talking about, because maybe there's something in here that's going to be useful for me.
Fantastic. Oh, thank you, Bill. Thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge with us. Where can people find your book?
Well, they can go to my website, bulletproofcriticism.com.au, and I'll have a link there to my Amazon link, so you can get the book there. But I'll be doing some, this is really just the start, as we were talking about before. I'm going to start a series of books, of Bulletproof from Criticism books. So there'll be one for entrepreneurs, small business owners. There'll be one for emerging leaders, people coming up through the ranks. There'll be one for couples, because couples need to learn to take feedback constructively, rather than take it to heart and crumbling and getting defensive, etc. I want to do one for teens and young adults, because I used to work in that area many, many years ago. And also one for artists and creatives, because for artistic people in particular, their piece of art is who they are. They haven't separated those two things. So if someone goes, wow, that's a lousy painting, like they can crumble, rather than going, oh, wow, so what bit was not so good, So I'm going to create a series of books. So people are any interest in any of those areas, and just contact me through my website, and let's have more conversations.
Fantastic. Well, we'll make sure that your links are all available in the descriptions, and fantastic. And people can now get in touch with you and learn more. It's just been so lovely to have you, Bill. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Elle. It's been so lovely talking with you.
Bless you.